Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our live event. My name is Victoria, and I work for Factorial HR, which is an HR software company offering digital solutions to HR professionals all around the world. Factorial simplifies your processes, improves internal communication within your
Which
company.
is an HR software company offering digital solutions.
Today, we are beyond proud to have Dr. Rochelle with us, a senior lecturer at Bristol University and a founder of Crowd Potential. She is an expert in digital transformation and remote work. She has a massive experience in creating leadership and people management strategies. And also, she has published work on managing the blended workforce and performance management. During the next hour, she will discuss today's topic driving performance and employee engagement in hybrid and remote teams. Hello, Dr. Rochelle, and welcome. The floor is yours.
Hi, Victoria. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be teaming up with Factorial HR. It's our very first collaboration, and I look forward to it. I'm really excited about this evening. So welcome to all of those who are joining us, and please let us know in the chat where you're joining from. You're most welcome, and we're happy that you've decided to join us today for this very important and relevant conversation. So I'm just going to share my slides, and then we'll get started. What I'll do is I'll talk about the topic for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll leave the other half of the webinar open for your questions and discussion so we can have a really interactive session. So I'm just going to share now, and then we will get started. All right, so you should be able to see my screen. Let me just double check that you can. Yes, perfect. Right. Okay, so today our main focus is how do we drive performance and employee engagement in hybrid and remote teams? And this is a conversation that every organization should be having at the moment, just because how the pandemic has really forced us to rethink the way we work. But this wasn't something that started let's say during the pandemic. This was something that was budding for a while. And I'll give you a little bit about my background just so you know how I got into this field, how I got into this area, and why this became my focal point. So really my background, I started working in HR and corporate, but I don't like 9 to 5. 9 to 5 has never been my structure. So always I say to people, my favorite reward in any job is flexibility. So when I got into academia after finishing the PhD, I was very interested to find out how work expectations were changing, just because students I noticed that were coming to me previously asking about, oh, how can we fill these? How can you help us get a vacancy in a large firm, or let's say an internship in a firm like GE or Siemens? Now students were coming to me 4 or 5 years later saying, actually, can you help us start our own app? Can you help us build an online business? We don't want to work in companies. So then I started a study that ended up launching my business and ended up launching the platform that I speak on. And this study was really looking at how the world of work is changing, but not only that, but how people's work expectations were changing. So below are just a few pictures of when I was doing this study. Here I was in Thailand in a co-working center, just speaking to different people about the way that they work, and also in Indonesia doing the same thing and just having discussions about the topic. So after the research, we launched that in February 2020, we launched a white paper called the Blended Workforce Revolution, which looked at how workers were demanding more flexibility, were demanding more work-life balance, and just their expectations of how the work should be done was changing. So because of that, we created a gig HR framework, and we started a company called Crowd Potential. This is where we focus on how we can help companies better engage with remote or hybrid workers, or if you have a mixture of full-time, part-time, independent, online, offline, whatever the case, just because our world of work has become so much more dynamic. So that led to the focus, especially since the pandemic, on not just remote work, but hybrid work. Because one of the things that we've seen is that in terms of future of work trends, yes, we're all very familiar now with how to work remotely, but more and more, while companies are trying to push people back into the office, a lot of companies are like a lot of well-known banks are trying to demand that their employees come back into the office. Most employees don't want to. Employees are saying, well, actually, no, I prefer a different life. They've reprioritized and they've decided, actually, no, I've had a taste of this. This might be something I want to pursue on a long-term basis. So what we are really interested in today is not just the trends that with people working more remotely or more hybrid, demanding hybrid work, but also what's the impact that's having on the company and what we need to do as organizational leaders, managers, and also employees and workers to change and really make sure we're making most of the context. Because hybrid work is definitely here to stay. And there's a new war for talent where companies are finding themselves increasingly losing talent to other companies who are offering more flexible and hybrid structures. So if you don't create the right environment for your employees to engage and to be productive, then you stand to lose some of your key and top talent. So I just wanted to make the very quick distinction, which we're probably all familiar with now, between hybrid and remote work. So when we're talking about hybrid work, we're talking about perhaps some of your work might be in the office, or there might be a physical presence, and maybe another part of the week you might be fully remote. Or it might be a case where some team members are fully remote and other team members are fully in the office. But hybrid work can take different forms. When we're talking about remote work, we're talking about where all employees, workers, independent contractors, your different stakeholders are fully remote, fully online, no physical presence. So we're referring mainly to that location independence. So these two methods, well, we've become quite familiar with remote work, really, because we didn't have a choice. Hybrid work now, because of employee shifting demand since the pandemic, is becoming now the number one option for employees. And a lot of companies stand to gain from both of these methods, both remote and hybrid work. And while many companies have seen that productivity increase, many workers have experienced the well-being and so forth, there's still a lot of companies that are not reaping a lot of the rewards that we see listed here because their approach to hybrid and remote work is still in a very haphazard way. Where we just concentrate on the logistics of remote work or making hybrid work happen, we miss the opportunity to really reap these rewards, especially when we create different classes of workers. So whether or not you are benefiting from increased commitment and loyalty, reduced stress among your workers, the savings that accompany it, and also your business being more competitive and productive, is going to depend on how you approach the process of transforming your organization into a remote or hybrid culture. Now, where you don't get that right, you stand to lose a lot. And a lot of companies that initially reap the benefits of remote work and initially reap the benefits of hybrid work, what they found is when they try to force employees back into the office, or when they try to accommodate employees' wishes for increased flexibility, in just saying, okay, well, you can work from home 2 days a week and come in 3 days a week, by just doing it in this haphazard way with no real direction, it's resulted in a lot of conflict and a lot of barriers and a lot of unhealthy practices, which has a lot of consequences for employees. So what we're seeing is a lot of managers and leaders with a very fixed mindset and still trying to stick to the old way of doing things. So remote or hybrid work is being seen as, well, let's just replicate the office, but in a virtual or half virtual way. And that's not what the hybrid work experience should be. It's not just about recreating the office context online. It's not just about that switch, that transition from working online or giving someone a more comfortable keyboard or so forth. And if you approach it with the same unhealthy views about productivity and unhealthy views about persons and how they should work and when they should work, and with that lack of trust or clarity, then you're going to end up with a lot of problems in your hybrid work experience and still employees leaving for better experiences. And these are often a lot of the issues that are experienced because where you don't approach your hybrid strategy or remote strategy in a strategic manner, what you end up having among employees is persons who find themselves overworking and burnout, or you end up with two different classes of workers in your organization, where you have those who are present and recognized as the most committed and are benefiting from the opportunities, and those who chose to work in a more flexible manner, having their opportunities limited, and feeling this guilt to overperform, and also persons perceiving them as less committed. So what we call that proximity bias. And also, if you don't set up for them to work in the right manner or the right communication channels, you also hinder their ability to perform the job because they have less information access, let's say, compared to somebody that's actually working in the office. So this is why when we are approaching remote and hybrid work, we can't just do it in a way where we're saying, okay, well, let's just give them 2 days off a week, or let's just let them work from, let's say, 2 days from home and 3 days from the office. That's not creating a hybrid experience. Where we're talking about engaging and increasing performance and engagement, then you have to make sure that you have a strategy and a vision for how you want to do that. So that's what we're really going to be discussing today. How do you go about transforming your workplace so that it becomes an effective space for enhanced performance and engagement while working in a hybrid or remote fashion? And it requires you really to ask yourself some key questions. The first thing, even before I get to the 4 questions we have outlined here, is what do you want to achieve from introducing a hybrid strategy? Or are you just introducing this strategy because it's what everybody else is doing? Does your company actually fit the strategy? Is your company ready to facilitate the strategy? Do you have all the right tools in place? And then you can start looking at these are the key questions. So start with your future of work and future of work vision and strategy, and know what you're trying to achieve, understand whether you have the right policies in place, and what implementation looks like when it comes to your remote and hybrid strategy. That might be a case where that strategy is occurring, the implementation of that strategy is occurring in a micro way or a step-by-step fashion, rather than you trying to transform the organization all at once. So this is a continuous journey, rather than just waking up one morning and saying, we're going hybrid and we're switching everybody's workstations tomorrow. Everyone now has a standing desk, a shared space, and this is our idea of hybrid. You come in 2 days a week. That's not hybrid, and you're going to run into trouble in the long run. So when we're looking at the hybrid and remote strategy for enhanced performance and engagement, you need to consider, in addition to having the right facilitating structure, do you have the right competencies to go remote or hybrid? And those competencies, we're going to come to the various competencies that managers, leaders, and employees should have if you're thinking about thriving in a remote or hybrid way. Also, is your team sufficiently motivated? And we know some people thrive in the remote or hybrid atmosphere and others don't, for several reasons. It might be personal reasons to do with their background, their workspace, challenges in their personal environment, whatever the case might be. And it's important to understand what blockades might exist. When we're talking about performance, it's really important to understand whether or not you're using the right measurements, or if your measurements still remain, let's say, if your measurements are outdated or they're still fixed towards, let's say, that pre-pandemic workspace. And finally, are you communicating effectively? Now, one of the biggest things that we saw with the introduction of remote work was that everybody rushed to introduce Zoom, what were the different tools? Asana, Trello, everything at once, Teams, and just using these different tools, but without really considering how these tools are used or building an effective communication strategy. So rather than just thinking about enhancing communication, it's important to understand whether or not you're communicating effectively, and if you're using these specific channels in a right way, and if your employees understand how to do that as well. Now, when we talk, attacking each of those areas separately, when we're talking about remote work competencies, we're talking about trying to bring about a change in mindset and culture. And that requires a change in the way in which employees work and understand work to be, but also in terms of the atmosphere that we create for employees to work in. So in addition to, let's say, for example, creating an office space, or what I like to say now, an office habitat that is fit for remote and hybrid work. It's also important that those persons who would have been previously working in the old office setting understands the shift that they have to make in order to thrive and not feel overwhelmed in that space. And some of the three of the key competencies that we outline is self-managed skills, interpersonal trust, and intercultural skills. Now, self-management skills, we're talking about equipping your employees or stakeholders to be able to work independently and given the tools and the necessary training that they require to be creative and innovative in the space that they're working in. Also, where necessary, virtual leadership has to be enhanced as well. Not everyone may have those skills, for example, to be able to lead a team that's made up of both full-time online and, let's say, full-time offline employees. And you have to be able to invest in helping employees to make that shift and understand the shift that needs to be made. Interpersonal trust is the biggest. And we still have a lot of companies where we're finding companies, again, trying to drag people back into the office. A lot of that is coming about because companies believe that they still need to see employees to truly believe that they're productive. And often you find a mixture, you find two perspectives in companies. Some companies will say, well, how can you expect us to trust our employees to work remotely if we can't see them? And I mean, several companies and studies have shown that productivity has increased during remote work, even to the point of employee burnout. But at the same time, what a lot of companies have noticed as well is, let's say, a year and a half, 2 years on, they're now seeing a drop in productivity as well. So you have those individuals that ask, well, how can we trust employees to work if we can't see them? And then the other camp asks, well, why would you not trust your employees to work if you can't see them, or to work in a hybrid or flexible way? And often those who are asking whether or not they can trust their employees to work remotely, it indicates that something is wrong within the organizational context. Something might be wrong within that culture that is resulting in employees defaulting to that question, or managers defaulting to that question. Is it bad hiring? Is it the way in which your team has been previously managed? Is it a lack of ability to perform the job, which might mean a lack of training in the environment? So there's something in that organizational context that's forcing managers and leaders to default to, no, we need people back in the office to ensure that they're being productive. So where we're trying to thrive in this remote and hybrid space, interpersonal trust is a must. And we're going to come to how we can really build on that in a second. Intercultural skills, especially where we're finding ourselves now working with people who are more globally dispersed and location independent. I've spoken to several companies and clients who constantly run into this issue of cultural differences and conflicts in meetings and sensitivities. I was speaking to, I was speaking to a client yesterday who works with a Chinese company, and he was saying that the problem that they're finding is that the leaders, headquarters in this company, leaders at headquarter level, are really finding a barrier to interacting with local employees, whether in the online and offline space. So now the role has become on to discover what are the blockades, or what are the assumptions that are stopping those two individual groups from communicating. So self-managed skills, interpersonal trust, and intercultural skills. Now I want to look at trust a little bit more. Now, where we find ourselves as leaders, managers struggling with this issue of trust, I often show this diagram because for the job that you have to perform, or that employee has to perform, you might need to ask yourself what type of trust is required in the situation. Now, we struggle to trust people to work remotely, sometimes because we might not have that long history of working with the individual, or we might not have seen them work in a remote way before, or we might be used to working very upfront and close with them. Now, where you have an emotional connection or emotional trust, where you've known that person for a very long time, you have seen what they can do in the organization, then you're more likely to trust that individual. But the issue with emotional trust, as you can see with this line here, is that it takes longer to develop. And that, again, is because it's established through experience and developed over time. But cognitive trust is what really gives us the ability to be able to give our team members space, especially when they're newer members of the organization, space to be able to work in a way that we're not micromanaging them, because it's built over a shorter period. And it's really it's called Swift Trust for that reason. And it's really based on the knowledge that you have about that person and the results you've seen them demonstrated, or the profile that they've come with, that allows you or gives you an indicator of how well they can do the job. So where we consider whether or not a person should be trusted, quote unquote, to work remotely, really and truly, it's about weighing up the factors and speaking to that individual as well to get an idea of whether or not the job that you're asking them to do can be performed remotely, if they have the skills to do it, and whether or not you have enough information that would allow you just to be able to let go a bit more. So if you have enough cognitive trust, then it allows you to be willing to let that person work without that micromanagement. So in terms of metrics, this is just, when we're talking metrics, we're talking about performance management. These are some of the metrics that we cling to, and which is why we struggle. These are just examples from different fields. And we cling to metrics that focus on quantitative or tangible outputs. And where we're focusing on this, I mean, of course, in the healthcare, you would want patient safety is an absolute must, and so forth, of course, absenteeism and so forth. But if we're just focusing on these types of metrics, and meeting quotas and meeting sales deadlines, this is where we push employees away from the organization. So you've given that flexibility. You said to them, you can work from home, you can do this, you can come in 2 days a week, whatever the case, but you got to be meeting these numbers. I want to see your quarterly reports by this, and so forth. Where it is that we're piling that pressure on for employees to deliver on these very fixed and set numbers and not encompassing the entirety of their performance, is where we tend to push employees away and where they get fed up. Often, one of the biggest downfalls when persons are working in a hybrid way is, one, they feel very guilty that they're not being seen. So they feel like they're being judged for that. But also, they feel as if they feel as if several factors are not being considered when it comes to their performance. So where we're just judging an individual on one type of performance metrics, rather than considering other tasks related or behavioral focused metrics, then it puts people off the hybrid experience. It results in a lot of guilt. It results in a lot of overworking from people as well. So rather than having a better work-life balance or creating that for your employee, you have someone at home that's waking up 6 a.m. in the morning, working from 6 a.m., taking little lunch breaks in between, but working right into the night because they think they have to make up for the fact that they're not there, even if they're hitting the numbers. So there's a real danger with that. So we often stress that if you want to create a hybrid work environment that feels fair, and feels, when I say fair, fair as in F-A-I-R, fair, that fair, feels fair and transparent for every type of worker, both working in the office, outside the office, whatever the case may be, then you have to expand your metrics to consider more task focused and task related metrics, and also behavioral focus metrics. And when you come to the behavioral focus, that is going to be not only at the individual level, but also at the team level. One of the biggest downfalls of teams is that there's a lack of cohesion, especially if you have 2 team members working online and 2 team members working offline. So where you build metrics that, let's say, indicate, or you build measures that indicate the level of team cohesion, and you are actually accounting for and supporting and providing the necessary resources to build team cohesion and communication effectiveness, then you are creating the space for enhanced engagement, as well as creating the ability for employees to perform better. Oh, I'm going to skip that there really quickly, because we also should mention, in terms of the task focus, these conversations, we know since a lot of persons have begun to work remotely, there've been a lot more of checking in conversations. And I often say that those check-in conversations have really become, in a lot of companies, check-up conversations. And that's where we go wrong as well. You don't just want to be checking up on your employees. Check-in conversations really are about making sure your teams and your individual members are okay, understanding what it is in their work setting that is perhaps creating a hindrance to them performing in the way that you would like them to perform. Find out if they're lonely. Find out if there's anything in their personal environment that might be creating a challenge for them. And just letting them know that you are there to support them and giving that empathy, but also actually supporting them. What structures are you putting in place? Whether that is providing them with a new keyboard, more ergonomic spaces, whatever the case might be. But you have to make sure that you are truly checking in with your employees rather than checking up on your employees. It's a very important distinction to make. Now, Hackman, in this criteria here, in this little diagram, he created these three main criterias if you wanted to maintain a productive team from regardless of where you're working in the globe. And where he was talking about performance, he was saying that these are the three key areas that we need to be concentrating on and supporting. If your team, if you've outlined goals for your team, SMART goals, whatever the case might be, you need to consider whether or not, of course, you're measuring whether or not your team is meeting the expectations of the company as a whole. And where are they falling short, if so? If they're falling short, what are the reasons? And one of the important things to consider there is that the reasons often might be at a management level too, not just at the employee level. So find out what it is that is hindering the results if they're not being delivered appropriately. The other thing as well is individual growth. While you're checking up on your team results, are you ensuring that support is being given to their individual growth? And how do you actually invest in that? Because that's going to help build the satisfaction and commitment among the team as well, where you're showing that you're actually inputting into their not only well-being, but their longevity in the company and ability to perform their role. And then finally, outputs. And this again goes back to the social cohesion of the team. What efforts are you making to make sure that your team actually feels and works like a team? I've spoken to so many remote work teams and hybrid teams that since they're out of the office, they meet up online to get the job done, and then that's it. They don't meet again until the next task is due or the next meeting is due. So there's no real team cohesion except for the, except for the reasons of completing the job. So companies need to think about what are you doing in the hybrid space to really build that team cohesion. And this is a really important point to make about the redesign of offices when it comes to hybrid work. Office spaces are changing. I guess probably 10 years ago, we would never have asked the question for the type of jobs that we're talking about, whether or not an office was important. But now we're on the path to asking ourselves why the office was even needed in the first place. But you have people who still prefer a few days in the office because with remote work, there's a danger of losing the social cohesion. So where you are moving towards an enhanced or evolved hybrid space, it's important to rethink the office mindset and not rethink the office mindset in terms of trying to replicate the office online or replicate the office remotely. But if it is that you're working more online and you have less people in the office, think about how you can redesign that office to feel like a collaborative habitat for your employees. Maybe they want to come in a few days a week, but they don't need to. So when they come in, what are they getting from coming into the office? Is it that they're just going to go to their old space and work and then leave? Or can you use that office or redesign that office in a way that it becomes an inspiring habitat for people when they use it, and it encourages social cohesion? So you might redesign your office in a way that's actually just built for social networking if you're finding that the majority of your team are increasingly working online. Maybe you create more spaces that are designed around helping people meet up to build inspiring ideas. Perhaps you're putting in more lounge spaces, perhaps you have more hot desks, whatever the case might be. Or for those who prefer to work remotely, maybe you're providing a stipend for co-working spaces. So you really have to think, if your team is not working together as a cohesive unit, and if you're definitely embracing or want to embrace hybrid work long term, and you don't want to get rid of the office, how can you redesign your office to be more of a collaborative and inspiring habitat rather than just a place with a chair and a desk that you come to work? So when we're talking about boosting motivation and boosting engagement, then it's a number of things. Some of them we mentioned before in terms of the space that employees are actually in, supporting them when it comes to their work setup, making sure they have the right training and competencies. But also, when it comes to actually outlining and creating the work and the goals, it's very important to make sure that employees are active in this process. And in that way, it creates a greater sense of ownership and leadership over the process. So collaborative goal setting must be must be a high point or must be a top priority. Because if you want employees, whether remote or online, to really invest in your goals, it can't be just handing down tasks to the employees, but you have to create an environment where the employees are being given the autonomy and the ability and the authority to co-create their goals. And that also helps with encouraging more innovation within the office. So think about how you can create that space for that collaborative goal setting, and also what individual support you can offer to make that happen. But what we're not saying is that in helping employees to create their own goals, we are not trying to let's say, reduce the standard that we are operating at. Instead, we are challenging employees to create and expect excellence within, let's say, building their goals or within outlining objectives or aiming for success. So you're not saying necessarily help employees create their own goals and we're trying to dumb those goals down. That's not the issue at all. The idea is to empower employees to challenge themselves and to constantly, to encourage excellence across the organization. But in doing that, you also have to make room for mistakes. So that's not saying expect perfection, but it's just saying enhance employees' ability to perform at the level that you expect them to. And make sure you're calling out this success as well. One of the big issues, again, with remote work is that some employees are recognized and others are not. And usually those who are not are the ones that tend to work more away from the office, whether it's just 2-3 days a week, if it's hybrid or not. Those employees that work full time are typically the ones that are recognized for their work. So when we first started the study a few years ago, and we were looking primarily at digital nomads, we used to call digital nomads, or persons that work online, we used to call them the invisible workforce. And one of the reasons for that is in our research, what we found constantly digital nomads and online employees kept complaining about was that they would do this amazing work, which would help the company to move forward in this objective. And then the credit for that was given to those who were actually in the company full-time and online. So there was no recognition that there was somebody behind the screen that actually made that process happen. So making sure that you celebrate the success of everyone in your team, regardless of when and how they work, and maintaining accountability as well, and making sure they have access as well to the company information is going to be crucial. And how willing you feel to trust people to access your information in the company is going to be very down to technology and how you digitize and the tech, let's say the tech ecosystem that you put in place to ensure that there's information security, you're protected in ways that you need to be online. And then, of course, making sure that you're having those ongoing conversations to see if at times maybe the performance goals need to shift. One of the things that we've seen in the last 3 weeks or more is that the world can change very quickly. I can't even say the last 3 weeks. I got to say the last 2 years, 2.5 years or more. The world the pace of change is just so constant that holding people to the same performance goals that you held them to, let's say 6 months ago, might be unrealistic. Even 3 months ago might be unrealistic. So it's important to make sure that you're having those ongoing conversations, both formal and informal, to understand what might be causing or what might be potential problems in the future and how can you support this. Now, one of the big enablers of enhanced performance and enhanced engagement in the hybrid and remote work setting is flex time. Now, I didn't say flexi time. We're very familiar with flexi time. Some of you, perhaps, you might let us know in the chat if you're familiar with flex time. And the idea behind flex time is not pushing all of your employees to have the same work schedule. So let's say, for example, you got a team of 5 people, 3 working online, 3 working in the office. And those who are working online, they got to sign on for 9 o'clock. The ones in the office sign on for 9 o'clock, and their expected work hours, that team of 5, regardless of where and how they're working, is 9 to 5. What flex time says to do is shove that out the window. Just toss it out the window and have employees work at a schedule that's best for them. Now, immediately, a lot of pushback comes with this idea because we're thinking, well, in certain careers, you have certain things that need to be signed off on. You have certain things that need to meet our regulatory requirements or so. And this is where, in order to make this happen, communication is important, where you speak to your team members and you find out what it is that is needed in their role to facilitate flex time. So, if by 12 p.m. you need team member B to sign off on something that team member A is done, you arrange your flex time in a way that if team member A prefers to work from 9 to 12 and they sign off then team member B picks up from there and works in that way. So the main thing is to ensure that you speak to your team and understand their specific environment so you can arrange the schedules that work best for your teams. And the way that really allows this to work is having that overlap time for collaboration between the colleagues. So if you have 3 people that their jobs, in order to execute their jobs, it depends on other team members, making sure those let's say those schedules overlap in a way that no one is waiting on information from someone else who's, I don't know, off on the beach or decided to do something else with the time that they prefer. So this is a process that needs to be set up but requires effective communication to make it happen. And coming to communication, it's really important in the remote and hybrid space that you understand not just what are the unique situations and the barrier. We've spoken a lot about removing barriers to contributions and considering individual circumstances, but you practice effective communication. So for example, if you know your team member who is vital to making a particular project happen is going to be on annual leave or going to be on holiday for 3 weeks, does every team member have an idea of what your communication protocols and roadmap is? So where, let's say, something comes up when they're on annual leave that only they can address and that's quite urgent, do you have an effective communication map that tells you, okay, well, if it's urgent, we send them, we call them. If it's not so urgent, but it needs to be done soon, we text them. If it's needed to be done next week, we email them. If it is that we want to recognize them for this, we communicate using Teams. If we want to encourage communication in the social setting, this is what we use instead. We're familiar that some tools, for example, Slack is preferred for a lot of social activities and mechanisms, but we're not just talking about the tools, but we're talking about how you choose to use the tools and whether or not all of your employees understand the protocols for the different tools that you're using. So if someone goes off tomorrow and you have an emergency, do you know not just which channel, but how is the best way to communicate that person for the particular issue that's being dealt with, so you don't find yourself, 1, duplicating, 2, overstepping, especially if someone's not available, or 3, making something more or less urgent than it should be. So it's really important to have a communication roadmap or a charter that everybody in the company understands. Well, if we know we want to go and build, we want to have a little social time, this is how we're going to plan this event through these means. If we know that it's this urgent thing to deal with, these are the mechanisms that we're going to use. But this is the protocol. If we don't hear them in 2 days, we use this channel instead, and so forth. So having that effective communication roadmap is important. So just to summarize, when we're talking about enhancing performance and engagement in the remote work setting, it's really about a cultural shift and mindset in the way that we think about work, because we're definitely moving towards more on-demand work where we have, let's say, persons working in the office, or online or with companies in a more project-based way. So you have a mixture of full-time, part-time, online, offline, independent stakeholders and contractors. And if that's the case, you can't be trying to constantly replicate the office online. What you're trying to move to instead, or trying to do, is to become more hybrid or remotely evolved, where you think about how can you reuse your spaces to enhance the culture and enhance the cohesion among your team. What are the new policies that are needed within your organizations? How can you retwig or adapt your performance metrics that fully encompasses the new way of working? So it's really important that we build on a lot of these areas that we just highlighted: the communication, the competencies, I forgot the other two now. Communication, we said the competencies, the metrics, and let me go back because my brain is slippery today. And the team motivation, yes, that's what we mentioned. It's really important that we're working on enhancing those four areas in order to be effective in this space. So I'm going to stop here for now because we want to leave enough time for answering questions. So feel free to give your questions in the chat, and I'll pass it back over to Victoria, and we'll continue going. So I'll stop sharing now, and Victoria, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much for this lovely presentation. I really enjoyed it. And of course, I can agree with you that remote and hybrid teams are very important today, and that we need to embrace this as soon as possible, because I think that the future is going that way. So while we were talking, we received several questions in the chat. I also had like a little poll on Instagram, and I got received like several questions there as well. So they were asking, can the fixed mindset of managers be easily changed?
It's definitely something that takes time, and is one of the biggest struggles that we constantly have when working with clients in the remote workspace, because we're talking about mindsets that were built over decades, and not even decades, like more than 50 years and onwards. We had this very traditional, very top-down structured approach to working. And over the years, yes, we've become a bit more horizontal in our management style, but constantly the work has often been tied to a physical space. So that takes time to shift and to change the idea that the physical space is where work needs to happen. So you can shift the mindset, but it takes intention to do it. It can't be done overnight or just by sending people remotely and trusting that the managers will catch up. Or that the managers will get on board. Because what we're seeing is the opposite. We're seeing a lot of big companies, the Morgan Stanley and other companies, demanding that people come to work in the office again, even though they've seen their productivity has gone up. So it really requires intentional training. So whether that is through ongoing workshops, whether that is through demonstration, showing that it can actually work, and reflecting on that change and building on that change. Whatever the company does, it has to be intentional.
I agree with you. And another question that was similar to this one was, how can managers improve their intercultural or maybe even communicational skills with the remote teams?
It comes down to a lot of exposure to begin with. So if you don't have the interaction with cross-cultural teams, then it becomes almost a bit daunting and a bit more difficult. But where you do have that exposure, that's a starting point. But also, if your managers or your leaders know that this particular job requires you to work with, let's say, globally dispersed teams, then they should also be investing in your cross-cultural training. Some of that sometimes might be pairing you with someone from another culture, or someone who works with a lot of other cultures, and you learning from them through shadowing or their coaching. Maybe it might be formal training. So there are a lot of cross-cultural consultants that come in and highlight a lot of mistakes we make in terms of stereotypes and biases, or even little ways in which we work. So for example, excuse me, constantly when I was doing cross-cultural training, there was always a clash between US, UK managers and Chinese, Japanese managers working in a team. And the clash was The US, UK managers take a functional approach to finishing projects. So you give them a project, come in, let's say it's for the first meeting, and the US, UK managers that I've been experienced with, attempting not to stereotype, come into the meeting and immediately begin to say, okay, well, let's divide up this activity. This is what needs to be done. You do this, you go away and look at this, you do that. Whereas the Chinese, Japanese managers would come into the meeting and they want to get to know who's in their team. They want to build that relationship first. So I often say the US, UK managers have a functional approach, and the Chinese, Japanese managers have a relational approach. So after maybe a few dinners, after a few social encounters where you get to know the team members, then the Chinese managers are now ready to say, okay, now that we have a better feel or know, we feel we know these individuals better and can trust them, let's now see who is best to perform a task. Where the US managers were, no, let's get down to it. And both methods can work, but really it's about which method is appropriate at what time.
Yes, and it also matters whether you know how to, implement those two approaches. When you know
Absolutely.
your cultures, you will know how to remove the stigma, how it's called. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Because I've seen some teams do that as well, where they say, oh, there's a Chinese manager in that team, and I don't want to work with any Chinese managers. I've done that before. I've had
exactly.
a headache, and that's not appropriate. That's not on at all. But it's
Yeah,
coming from past experience or maybe a lack of knowledge on how to work with that person.
of course. Yes. Okay. Another question we received was, what HR tools would you say are crucial for good transition to hybrid work from long term?
Yeah, I would definitely say you need to have the right policies in place. So start with the strategy, start with your vision and strategy, and then that informs the tools you use. So, what is it that you are trying to achieve from going hybrid? And once you know what you're trying to achieve, then you can start to outline, okay, we want to go hybrid, and we want to go hybrid over the next year because we think it would allow us to better engage with our clients globally, and our employees state that they prefer to work more flexibly. So now we need a new remote work policy, for example, or maybe we need an analysis of various jobs. We need to review these jobs, do an internal job audit to find out which jobs might be challenged by going hybrid or going remotely. And then once you do that, when you actually get down to the individual teamwork, or well, let's say from the HR perspective, managing these individuals, you want to look for platforms that allow you to engage your talent as well as monitor them. I don't like to say monitoring, it sounds like you're overseeing and
Mhm.
controlling. But of course, if you're working with a globally dispersed team, you want to be able to have an idea of where everyone is at and so forth. So platforms, shameless plug, but platforms like Factorial are perfect for that, where you have
Exactly.
an HR platform that allows you to recruit. It allows you to do your onboarding process. You can see how your employees are performing. You can integrate and chat with those employees via integrate other platforms like Slack and create a social setting. So it allows you to manage talent. It allows you to track development. So platforms like Factorial and other HR platforms, people are familiar more with Bamboo HR and that sort of thing, but I do like Factorial, but I'm biased. I'm biased too, but anyhow, anyhow.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you have the right platforms as well. But first, start with your strategy. Often people go straight for the platforms and the tools without thinking, well, why do we even need them in the first place? Or is this appropriate and linked to my overall vision? And then from there, you can start thinking also about, well, do we need to redesign the office? And what is our future workforce plan? And does it include persons that work independently? So your gig workers and your digital nomads. Does your talent strategy and your future work plan include them as well? And does it need to include them? I would say absolutely yes, it does, because more and more people are working in that way. So those are just one of two. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And another one, it says, we were just talking at work about the performance metrics. Could you expand more on what are the effective performance metrics?
Yeah. So I usually encourage, for example, behavioral competency frameworks that you can then link to, of course, your KPIs and so forth. But if you're going to have KPIs, have them in a way that is not just considering the hard metrics, but the softer metrics, whether or not the manager is engaging in behaviors that will build team cohesion? Are they engaging in effective communication? Because while actually performing the task, for example, if you're doing sales, getting 10 sales, let's say your requirement is 10 sales a day. Let's say you have a manager, team leader that's hitting those 10 sales every single time. While that's a great while that is a great function, a great performance by the hard metrics, what if his performance and his behavior while trying to hit those 10 sales a day is actually stopping the rest of the team from performing or reducing their motivation because he's involved, he's let's say engaging in a lot of bad behavior, engaging in a lot of cutthroat dog eat dog activities in order to make those 10 sales. So really it's important to have a mixture of behavioral competencies and behavioral indicators and those task focus indicators that gives you an idea of if this employee is operating in a way that you want to reward or you want to replicate, because the metrics, the hard numerical metrics really tell just about a quarter of the story.
Yes, exactly. Okay, and another question about the health metrics. How can managers have a healthier view of productivity and maybe improve their health metrics, and how much are they important?
They're absolutely important. And I mean, if we're looking at people analytics or HR analytics, I'd start by looking, of course, at your turnover rate and looking at your absence, your sickness and absence rates, and comparing them with other metrics. And with bringing the data together from those different metrics, let's say extracting them out to give you a holistic picture of what's going on, you have an idea, you have a better idea of, well, what is it that is causing a lack of productivity, or what is it that's causing a burnout? Because again, let's say if you have an employee that's hitting all of the right numbers, but then they leave 3 months down the line, do you have a way of better predicting whether an employee is likely to leave the organization using your other various metrics? So I would say for leaders, make use of the data, but also have conversations, real conversations with your people, not checkups, check-ins. Remember, you want to be checking in with your employee and this is do I want to say post-pandemic? I don't know if it's fully over, but let's go with post-pandemic for now. 2 years on from the pandemic, people have been so worn and burnt out and mentally challenged, especially trying to balance work and fear of losing their jobs with all of these personal and more societal crises. So it's really important to get to know your employee situation rather than say, how are we going with those deadlines? I just wanted to check in or check up and see where you are with this deadline. Rather saying, well, how are you doing? How are you really doing? You know?
Yeah.
I think organizations that encourage more kindness, encourage more empathy, are the ones that are really going to reap the benefits. And you're not trying to do that in a opportunistic way, but we're all human. We've all been experiencing some really awful things in the last 2 years. And it's really, if you're going to be a good leader, it's really important to remove that curtain of authority or that big hard wall or barrier or come out to the ivory tower and really inquire about the well-being of your employee, because then that will help to inform how you address that. It's not going to be the same way in every organization. I always make the example because I was in a job once. I hate 9-to-5 jobs. I haven't had a 9-to-5 job since my early 20s. But as a part of academia is very flexible, which is one of the reasons I like it. So I do academia and I have my consulting company. But one of the reasons I love academia was because, well, I work on my own time. But what I found working at a previous university X amount of years ago was that the workload became so much where I had my own time. I wasn't at the university every day, but yeah, I was feeling burnt out. I was working every weekend. And then when I spoke to my manager there, the solution was, oh, well, we've just introduced these yoga classes and we have these sessions now in mindfulness. So go and attend those and get some breathing lessons and take a minute to pause. But where you're introducing mindfulness classes, but you're not, or let's say yoga sessions and these sort of well-being initiatives, but you're not actually making provisions for your employee to be able to attend and attend guilt-free, then it's a waste of time. So where we're talking well-being is not just introducing these sort of initiatives, but it's actually making sure that employees have the ability to either take up the initiatives or reduce the other factors that might be causing stress. Maybe the employee doesn't need a yoga lesson. What they need is for you to be more flexible with the deadline if possible. What they need is for you to hire more people rather than have 3 people performing the jobs of 1 person, which is why a lot of employees are burning out. So I think we really need to think differently about well-being. Initiatives, yeah, they're important, but if your employees are so overworked and burnt out, how are they going to really take advantage of those initiatives?
Yes, I agree with you. I think that maybe the company should more dedicate its focus on every employee and see what are their needs and how they can improve their or stay there or their work there, depending whether they're remotely or at the office. Okay,
Absolutely.
and another thing here it says, how can you increase the cohesion in your remote team?
So you have several ways of doing this. I'll give you a really good example that I liked. And this is from the Caribbean. I'm from Barbados originally. And I really admired a lot of the, because I work in the UK context. So I get to see like the global practices, but then I also get to see the practices back home and compare them. And I saw a company that were doing these Friday block parties. So you had, for example, you work all during the week. And then Friday, they insisted 5 p.m. was the cutoff. And I think it's really important for companies to make sure that they set and insist on the cutoff work time and also insist on people taking breaks and making the space for it. I know for this particular organization, they used to do it twice a week. So they had the Friday end of week block party, and then they had this social networking virtual coffee events as well, where you could tag an employee and you jump on. If you feel like taking a break, just tag an employee in the teams or just indicate that you're taking a break and maybe jump in that room where you can chat to somebody if you're working remotely. But the block parties were legendary. I got to actually attend one once, being a guest there. And they brought a DJ in. They had the virtual room. They had a virtual lounge. They encourage employees to get a drink, whether alcoholic or non-alcoholic. Bring your drink to this party. Make sure you set up space to dance if you want. Put on your camera if you feel like and dance, wave your hand, whatever. But they created this atmosphere where employees didn't need to be in the office to feel connected. Just being able to attend that event together and have something to talk about after really helped. But if you are taking a hybrid approach, I think you can really make strategic use of your office in that way. Think about the office. If you're finding more and more of your employees are working remotely, and you don't want to get rid of the office, but you're finding now you have a lot of empty offices or empty spaces, maybe turn those into more comfortable spaces, maybe lounge areas, maybe creative flipboard spaces where people can come and collaborate on ideas, or maybe just somewhere that employees can just have fun, like a games room if you want. But reimagine the office into this inspired space where if it is that your remote workers want to come in occasionally, then they can make use of this space. But also in digitizing, you can bring that social cohesion and that feeling of togetherness online as well if you create the right structures.
Excellent. Okay, so unfortunately, we are approaching the end of our 1 hour session. So if anyone has other questions, they can also go ahead and join our HR community on factorial.co.uk. And they can just go there and discuss this topic further with other HR professionals from all over the world. And thank you so much, Dr. Rochelle. And we are so greatly excited that you are here with us today and that you joined this session. You had an amazing presentation, and of course, you answered all of the questions. Great. So thanks to you and also to everyone who attended this webinar. Tomorrow, we will be sending you the materials, the slides, the video, and the resources. And also, for everyone who is here with us today, don't hesitate to add me or Dr. Rochelle on LinkedIn for any further questions and doubts you may have on this topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank